Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Liftoff PM. I'm Selena Shang. I'm a senior PM at Google, and we have a special guest today, Kay, joining us to talk about what it's like to transition from engineering to PM. Kay, do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Kay. I originally started off as a software engineer at Microsoft, made the transition to PM while I was at Microsoft, and most recently worked at Snapchat and Clubhouse.
Awesome. And thank you again for being here. We're really excited to chat. And so, just to dive in, what made you sort of realize you wanted to make the switch into PM?
Yeah, I really loved what I was doing as a software engineer. I really loved coming up with creative solutions to really interesting engineering problems. But what I found was that I was always pushing for more. I was always pushing back about, why are we building this? What is the business impact? What are the business reasons for building this? And I just came to realize that I really myself wanted to have more of a direct impact on the business.
Yeah, you're more in the know of why we're doing things and for, what reasons and why it matters. That makes a ton of sense. Okay, so then you were at Microsoft when this realization was happening, I'm assuming. And so when you were sort of making the prep, or making the switch, what was your approach to actually going forward and making this happen?
I attempted a pretty traditional path of preparing my resume, trying to highlight basically as much of the product related experience that I had, really trying to frame a lot of the work that I did as a software engineer, not just about the engineering components itself, but what I did that was related most to product management skills. I applied a lot of cold applications, to be honest, and most of them at the time, especially, I didn't hear feedback from. So basically, I started out by applying to a lot of cold applications. And when I saw I wasn't getting any responses, I basically tried to go more and more in network. So then I tried network with other PMs within Microsoft. So at the time, I was trying to switch within Microsoft, but in a different org. I did a lot of coffee chats with different senior PMs, principal level PMs within Microsoft. I also attempted by applying to APM programs.
So in retrospect, as you were going through the process, and sprucing up your resume, not getting any feedback on the cold calls and cold applications, what do you think is the biggest takeaway in that process that you wish you knew when you started?
Coming in as someone without a PM background, without PM experience, competing in a pool where everyone else is a PM, even if they're more junior than you, often meant that I'm going to be overlooked in a cold application. And especially in a market like today, in the tech market that we're in today, it's even more and more important that you have as relevant experience as possible. And so generally what I recommend to many mentees and folks who ask me about switching from engineering to PM, I think the most powerful leverage you have into really scoring those initial interviews when you're moving from engineering to PM are warm intros. People that can back you and really speak to not only your experience, but also your dependability as a teammate. And often where I've seen people have the highest conversion rates from engineering to PM, to be honest, is within their own teams, because it's with people who've worked with you before and who can vouch for you.
Maybe for the audience, how would you really structure those sorts of calls in a way that was, mutually beneficial? I find personally, when I'm networking, I want to make sure that it's not just me extracting value, right? You want to make sure that you're giving back. Do you have any advice for folks how they might be able to structure some of these coffee chats?
My recommendation when you reach out to people for coffee chats, especially if they aren't someone that you know directly. So usually there are two types of people that I will reach out to if I want to build a connection with them. The first type is usually we have a shared mutual connection. And then that's the most straightforward. I can ask the mutual connection for an intro. And it goes pretty straightforward because we both know this person that we trust. The second type is more of the cold reach, So sometimes I'll send cold messages to LinkedIn to folks. Usually I will target people that I have something in common with. So whether they're an alum from the same university as me, or if they are also previous ex-Microsoft or ex-Snap, or sometimes at least a stage of my career where I'm at, maybe they'll share some sort of shared domain experience that I've also had in my career. And so when I'm approaching them, I'm giving them context about why I chose you specifically as the person I need advice from.
That's really helpful. Yeah, it helps sort of break through the noise of, the tens and tens of requests that they get for chats, I'm sure. And then sort of like very tactically, when you're in this moment with this person, you're chatting, you need to make an ask at some point. Do you have any advice on like how to make the ask? Like, hey, like keep me in mind for this role. Like, do you have any open roles? How do you usually go about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that I've personally struggled with, I think, as I've learned how to build professional connections and network. I think some folks, some folks might feel the word networking is a bit slimy, or they might feel a bit uncomfortable asking for something at the end. I really encourage you to try to keep these conversations as natural as possible. Like, don't think of it as you're going in trying to ask for something. Go into it thinking that you're trying to build a connection with this person. You're trying to look for a connection with this person. So, based on how your conversation will go, you can maybe get a sense by the end of the meeting whether this person might be open or not to helping you with an intro. Sometimes or usually actually personally, I like to follow up with my ask after the meeting so that that person doesn't feel completely on the spot. But to summarize, my recommendation is really you have to do it on a case by case basis, reading sort of how well your conversation went.
And I like the sort of nuance, like when you're reading the situation, whether you feel comfortable enough asking them like in person, or if you feel like, you don't want to put them on the spot, you can always follow up over email. I think that's a good point. And then maybe to add, like for those who are listening, I think one thing that has worked for me and maybe for you is if you don't really have a concrete ask about a role, you can still ask them for another warm intro to one of their connections, right? And sort of follow that chain. And I think that's like a really cool way to meet people. Cool. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's super useful. So now, you've made the switch. You've been a PM for like a few years now, right? Um, can you tell me a little bit about what you were surprised about when you first became a PM? Maybe a couple things you wish you knew when you started.
Number one, I think what surprised me the most, especially coming from a technical background, being a software engineer, is that no amount of prep will actually prepare you for the job of being a product manager. No amount of prep of like studying, of mock interviews will actually prepare you and build the skills that you need as a product manager. I think as someone coming from a software engineering background where the interviews are very black and white. The interviews are like either you know the answer and you did it correctly or you didn't. Product management interviews are on the completely other end of the spectrum. They can honestly go in any direction imaginable. It's really about I think demonstrating those subtle, more human skills of being able to persuade and have your listener follow along with you on that journey. I think to that point, as a software engineer, you can work on your coding skills. You can have a bunch of side projects. But as a product manager, a lot of your skills are around leadership and teamwork. And ultimately, that's not a skill that you can build on your own. My other two, I wish I knew the different nuances and types of product managers there are. I've noticed switching from SWE to PM that domain experience, I would say, means a lot more to your career as a PM than as a software engineer. And again, especially in the market that we're in today, people are hiring because that they want people to like really hit the ground running. So if you can come in positioning yourself as the exact type of PM they're looking for, whether that's enterprise, consumer, platform, etc., that'll help give your resume, your application a leg up over everyone else. And then the last thing, to be honest, is that I know project management and product management often, especially folks outside of industry, might tend to confuse the two. And to be honest, at a lot of companies, especially those that don't have a separate project management division from product management, it can be a bit of a slippery slope as a product manager, sort of where your ownership and responsibilities lie. And so I strongly, strongly recommend reminding yourself, when are you actually creating impact and when are you letting busy work let you feel like you're making impact?
Yeah, definitely. There's it's definitely a trap you could fall into if you've never been a PM before and you don't know like the roles and responsibilities so clearly. So I'm curious, like, so now that you've been a PM for a few years, and I know you've done consumer and enterprise. For maybe, engineers listening to this, how would you describe enterprise and consumer at a high level, for those who are trying to decide which path to take?
Yeah. So I'll start with consumer because I think almost all of us almost all of us for sure have interacted with a consumer product at some point or another. But consumer products like, for example, Facebook, Instagram, etc., you're working with a very, very large user pool. Typically, you're working with a larger user pool. You usually ship at a faster rate than enterprise because you're testing different features. I would say with consumer, you can drive a bit of the roadmap more based on sort of the responses that you get from data, whereas in enterprise, it's a little different. So in enterprise, you are generally working with fewer customers. You're working with fewer customers, but on bigger projects, like more hand in hand. And so because, for example, let's say your customers like Accenture or Visa, et cetera, you might have less, like persuasion power in the sense, because ultimately they're your customer, right? So they're going to tell you what they need and what they want built. And so it's a little bit less dependent on like the overall climate and market and more curated to these customers. Also, because you're working with a more specific set of customers, you might ship at a bit of a slower rate because you're really working very, very closely to the very specific needs of these enterprise customers.
And then this is a personal question. Do you have a preference?
I really enjoyed my time working at both. I think at enterprise, especially working at enterprise like Microsoft, you have huge scope impact right away just because the number of customers Microsoft has. Personally, for me, in terms of the products that I've gotten to launch and built, I really enjoy being in consumer.
Cool. And then maybe another sort of personal question. Is there anything you miss about being an engineer?
Yes, yeah. I don't know. I think the things that I miss the most about being an engineer, to be honest, are just like participating in design discussions. And honestly, at the end of the day, getting to feel the pride and satisfaction of something that you just built with your own hands being used by real users and people.
Do you still use any of those engineering skills as a PM today?
So when I first graduated college, the classic advice that I received and that I still see is often given is, start your career off as a software engineer, really establish yourself as an engineer, and then make the switch to PM, because then you'll earn the respect of the engineers that you work with in the future as a PM. For me personally, since making that switch, I have not found that to be the case. I don't think just because I have the label of engineer on my resume, I don't think that alone is what earns me the respect from engineers. I think it's really when I'm able to dive into code with engineers, when I'm able to hold not just a technical conversation, but really go through the code myself and point things out and really flex those previous engineering skills. I think that's when they see it live, then they take my technical skills a little bit more seriously.
Yeah, they can see it in practice rather than just like a word on a piece of paper.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, cool. And I know, like, again, thank you so much for being on the show. I know you do a lot of like mentorship calls with folks who are trying to switch from Eng into PM. What are some of the most common questions you get asked? And then, of course, like how do you usually respond?
Yeah, the most common question that I get asked, actually the most common question I get asked and approached for is essentially this entire interview, which is how do you switch from Eng to PM? I generally recommend to my mentees 3 specific routes. These are the 3 that I've seen the most success, not just personally, but also within industry and across colleagues and peers who have made the switch. So number 1, I mentioned before, which is try to make the switch within your team, within as many sort of warm connections as you can. You'll have the most luck, someone backing you there. Number 2, perhaps make the switch to a smaller company, a startup. It might even a job that might include a bit of a pay cut, to be honest, but even a place that is willing to take the chance to give you the opportunity to work as a PM. Because once you get the PM label on your resume, then doors will start opening to you a lot easier, a lot more easily and a lot faster. And then number 3 is making the switch within a domain of your expertise. So I've seen, I had a former colleague at Snapchat. She actually moved from being a software engineer at Airbnb to being a PM at TikTok. because she worked on growth at both places.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, those are solid tips. And then maybe just to like wrap up, I know I asked you like if there's anything you miss about being an engineer. In a related vein, as you look back on your transition, is there anything you wish you would have done differently?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation overall because it's really given me the chance to reflect on my own personal journey of making it from engineering to PM. I definitely think that I would have saved myself a lot of time and a lot of angst if I had realized earlier on the cold applications are not the way to go. I really are really trying to get my foot in the door via more less conventional means, whether it's warm intros or through APM programs. Um, the second thing I probably regret the most in my journey so far was when I was first making the switch from dev to PM. I had a general idea that I did want to move more into the consumer space. And I actually did receive an offer at the time from a fashion startup to be a consumer PM. At the time, because it didn't match my software engineering salary at Microsoft, I turned it down. But in retrospect, I really think that it would have been a really great it would have been a really great learning opportunity that would have paid dividends further down into my career because I think not taking that role came back to bite me when I was later trying to move from Microsoft, from enterprise to consumer, because I didn't have as much consumer experience.
That makes sense. And especially as you mentioned, like in today's environment, like folks want people who can hit the ground running. And so, having that consumer experience, if you want to do consumer experience, is going to matter a lot more.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, thank you so much again. It's been awesome chatting with you. And yeah, for those who are listening, good luck with your transition and follow up in the comments if you have any additional questions.